My name is Loretta Carver, and I'm 59 years old. I never thought my own son-in-law would be the person to make me feel small over something I'd worked my entire life for. I've always lived a modest life, quiet, predictable, comfortable. After teaching elementary school for over 30 years, I retired early and settled into a rhythm that brought me peace. My husband, Richard, passed away 7 years ago, and since then, it's just been me in our little house at the edge of town. I've learned to enjoy the silence, to find joy in small routines, watering the roses every morning, baking bread on Sundays, walking to the park when the sun begins to dip behind the trees. My daughter, Kendra, is my pride and joy. She's 33 now, bright and kind-hearted, though sometimes too trusting for her own good. She married Elliot, a financial consultant who always seems to wear a smirk like it's part of his wardrobe. He's 35, tall, well-groomed, and painfully aware of it. Every sentence out of his mouth feels like a sales pitch, even when he's saying good morning. The first time I met him, I could sense his self-importance. He shook my hand with that firm, practiced grip, looked around my house with polite disinterest, and complimented my cozy decor as though he were touring a bed and breakfast. Still, for my daughter's sake, I smiled and tried to like him, but over the years, his confidence evolved into condescension. And every time he spoke about money, it was as if he were performing on stage. I've always been careful with finances. My husband and I weren't wealthy, but we were disciplined. I learned early on that saving consistently, even in small amounts, was better than chasing big dreams that might collapse. So, after retiring, I made it a habit to put away a portion of my pension every month into a simple savings account. Nothing extravagant, just quiet, steady security. Elliot, however, had other opinions. He believed that playing the stock market and flipping real estate were the only paths worth taking. He used to joke that people who just save money are letting inflation rob them blind. I'd laugh it off, but sometimes his tone cut deep. One particular Sunday, the sting of his arrogance became impossible to ignore. We were sitting at my dining table, Kendra, Elliot, and me. I'd cooked a roast, the kind my husband used to love, with garlic potatoes and honey-glazed carrots. The conversation, as usual, drifted toward Elliot's favorite subject, success. He was talking about one of his clients, a retired couple who, according to him, were living their best lives after letting him manage their portfolio. Then, turning to me, he asked casually, "So, Loretta, how's your retirement plan going? Still working with that little savings account?" Kendra immediately gave him a look, but he didn't notice. He was too busy swirling his wine like some sort of Wall Street philosopher. I smiled politely. "Yes, my savings account is doing just fine." He chuckled, not maliciously, but with that smug amusement that makes you want to throw the wine right back in the glass. "That's adorable," he said. "But you know, with the way inflation is, that's not really doing much. You should let me take a look at your finances sometime. I could help you make that really grow." His words stung more than I expected. It wasn't what he said, but how he said it like my years of sacrifice and cautious planning were just a silly hobby. Kendra shifted uncomfortably, but she didn't say anything. I forced a small laugh and replied, "I appreciate the offer, but I'm quite content with my approach." He leaned back, smiling that self-satisfied smile. "Contentment's nice, but you don't want to outlive your savings, right?" That comment hit a nerve. Outlive my savings? I'd spent my life budgeting, sacrificing, teaching kids how to read and write while he made money manipulating numbers. Yet somehow, he thought I was the naive one. I looked him straight in the eye and said quietly, "Don't worry about me, Elliot. I'll be just fine." He shrugged and turned back to his plate, clearly dismissing the conversation as over. But I wasn't done processing it. After dinner, I helped Kendra wash the dishes while Elliot went to the living room to scroll through his phone. She sighed and said softly, "Mom, don't take him too seriously. He doesn't mean it that way." I smiled faintly. "Oh, honey, I know. But just because someone doesn't mean to hurt you doesn't mean it doesn't sting." That night, after they left, I sat in the quiet glow of my kitchen light, staring at the stack of bills and bank statements on the counter. I thought about all the years I'd scrimped and saved, the vacations I never took, the clothes I didn't buy, the careful decisions I'd made when Richard and I planned our future. My so-called tiny savings represented decades of discipline and love. Yet, to Elliot, it was a punchline. As I turned off the lights and walked toward my bedroom, I whispered to myself, one day, he'll understand. But the truth was, I didn't believe he ever would. People like Elliot only respected what they could measure: numbers, assets, and status. They didn't understand the quiet strength behind consistency or the dignity of restraint. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something inside me had shifted. His laughter had lit a small flame I didn't know existed, not anger exactly, but resolve. Over the next few days, his words echoed in my head every time I checked my account balance. "That's adorable," he'd said. I couldn't let that be the final word. Not because I needed to prove him wrong, but because I needed to remind myself, and maybe him, that value isn't always loud or visible. And maybe, just maybe, my tiny savings weren't so tiny after all. I didn't know it then, but Elliot's arrogance would become the very thing that destroyed him. I've always believed in quiet strength, the kind that doesn't shout, doesn't boast, and doesn't need an audience to prove it exists. That's how I've lived my whole life: carefully, intentionally, quietly. Maybe that's why nobody, not even Kendra, ever knew about the hidden account. It wasn't meant to be a secret out of distrust. It was something I built for peace of mind, a safety net I created after losing my husband, Richard. When he passed, the world suddenly felt unstable, fragile. I didn't know who I could depend on anymore, so I decided to depend on myself. After the funeral, when the condolences stopped and the loneliness set in, I sat down with our family banker, Mr. Hillman. He'd known Richard and me for years. A dignified man with silver hair and kind eyes, he spoke with the gentleness of someone who'd handled many life transitions like mine. "Loretta," he'd said softly, "you don't need to rush into anything. But when you're ready, I'll help you make sure you're taken care of." A few months later, I sold the lake cabin Richard and I had inherited from his parents. It was a beautiful place, but maintaining it alone was impossible. Instead of spending the proceeds, I asked Mr. Hillman for advice. He introduced me to a set of municipal development bonds and small rural investment projects, low risk, steady return opportunities that most people ignored because they weren't flashy. That's when the hidden account began. Every year, I'd meet with Mr. Hillman for an update. He'd print out pages of figures, percentages, and forecasts, things I only half understood. But I trusted him, and more importantly, I trusted patience. I didn't chase big wins. I didn't gamble on trends. I just waited, letting time do its work. Meanwhile, I continued living modestly. I clipped coupons, cooked at home, and fixed things myself rather than hiring people. Kendra sometimes teased me for being old-fashioned, but I didn't mind. To me, every dollar saved was a promise kept to the woman I wanted to be: independent and unshaken. When Elliot entered our lives, I never thought much about explaining my finances. What would be the point? He lived in a different world, one of fast cars, networking events, and champagne toasts. He was obsessed with growth, numbers, and status symbols. The quiet kind of wealth I had built on consistency and humility wasn't something he could recognize, even if it stared him in the face. Still, every time he made a jab about my tiny savings, it pricked a little deeper. And after that dinner, when he laughed so casually at something sacred to me, I began to rethink everything. I pulled out an old binder from the back of my closet, the one labeled Hillman Financial. Inside were years of statements, letters, and account summaries. I hadn't looked through them in detail for ages. Sitting at my kitchen table that night, I flipped through the papers, running my fingers over numbers that seemed to grow with each page. When I reached the most recent summary, my breath caught. The total figure at the bottom looked almost unreal. I picked up the phone and called Mr. Hillman the next morning. He answered on the second ring, his voice as calm as ever. "Mrs. Carver, it's been too long. How are you?" "I'm fine, thank you, Mr. Hillman," I said. "But I think it's time I came in for a review." We scheduled an appointment for the following Monday. When I arrived at the bank, the tellers greeted me with polite nods. Mr. Hillman ushered me into his office, where sunlight filtered through the blinds onto neatly stacked folders. He reviewed my file, adjusted his glasses, and smiled. "You've done remarkably well, Loretta. Between your municipal bonds, the renewable energy partnerships, and your property funds, your assets have grown nicely." "How nicely?" I asked, my curiosity piqued. He looked down at the report, then back at me. "Just over $3.4 million in total value, Mrs. Carver." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. 3.4 million. I'd expected something significant. Maybe $500,000. But this was beyond anything I'd imagined. I must have looked stunned. Because Mr. Hillman chuckled softly. "Patience has a way of rewarding those who respect it." I sat there, speechless, letting the number sink in. For all those years I'd lived carefully, been mocked for being too cautious or too simple, I had been quietly building something extraordinary. And now, my tiny savings had become a fortune. On the drive home, my mind swirled with thoughts of Elliot, the arrogance in his tone, the laughter, the way he'd looked at me as though I were foolish. A new feeling began to grow in my chest, not anger, exactly, but a quiet, powerful certainty. He needed to see it. Not because I wanted to humiliate him, but because I wanted to teach him. He was the kind of man who only learned through experience, and I had the perfect lesson waiting for him. The next time we met, I decided, would be at the bank, my bank. And he would stand there, face to face with the truth he'd been too blind to see. Before leaving Mr. Hillman's office, I made a small request. "I'd like to move part of my portfolio into a visible checking account," I told him. "Something under my main name. A few $100,000 should do." He nodded, understanding immediately. "May I ask what this is for?" I smiled. "Let's just say, I have a point to prove." He chuckled, closing the folder. "Ah, a personal project then?" "Exactly," I said. "And I'd like your help arranging a meeting with my son-in-law when the time comes. I want him there just once when we go over the figures." His eyebrows rose, slightly, then he gave me a knowing look. Understood, discretion, as always. That night, I went home, brewed myself a cup of chamomile tea, and sat by the window. The stars outside shimmered softly over the rooftops. I felt an odd calm wash over me, not the usual comfort of routine, but something sharper, purposeful. For years I'd let Elliot's words roll off my back. But this time, I wanted him to feel what it was like to underestimate someone who refused to live loudly. I wanted him to see the quiet empire he'd mocked without ever knowing it existed. As I finished my tea, I could almost picture the look on his face when he realized the truth. That smug grin wiped clean, replaced by the dawning realization that he'd spent years laughing at a woman who outpaced him by miles. It wasn't about revenge, not exactly. It was about balance. For the first time in a long while, I slept soundly. Because soon, very soon, Elliot would learn the lesson of a lifetime. And the best part? He'd learn it in a place where money spoke louder than words. The next time Elliot walked into a bank, he'd walk out a different man. Every woman knows the exact moment she's had enough. It doesn't happen with fireworks or yelling, it's quieter than that. It's the still, sharp moment when something inside you simply clicks and says, "No more." For me, that moment came during what should have been a joyful evening, my daughter's birthday dinner. Kendra was turning 34, and I wanted everything to be perfect. I spent the whole morning bustling around my kitchen. The smell of roasted garlic and thyme filling the air, a lemon meringue pie cooling by the window, and candles lined neatly down the center of my dining table. Kendra had always loved simple, homey celebrations. Growing up, we didn't have much, but she never needed big parties. Just laughter, stories, and her favorite meal, baked chicken with rosemary and honey carrots. By 5 o'clock, everything was ready. The house glowed with the warm scent of food and the faint hum of old jazz records spinning in the background. I stood in front of the mirror, smoothing the wrinkles from my dress, trying to calm the nerves I couldn't quite explain. I told myself it would be fine. Tonight would be about family, about Kendra. When they arrived, I hugged her tightly first, her arms still soft and familiar like when she was a little girl. Then came Elliot, stepping through the door like he owned the air around him. He wore a sleek charcoal blazer, gold cufflinks glinting under the light. His cologne hit before his voice did. "Smells amazing in here, Loretta," he said with that same confident grin that never seemed to fade. "You really went all out." I smiled politely. "It's Kendra's day. She deserves it." Dinner began pleasantly enough. Kendra told stories from work, and I listened as she laughed about her coworkers. I loved watching her happy. But slowly, as always, Elliot took control of the conversation. He started bragging about his latest clients, a celebrity influencer and some real estate investors in Miami. He talked about deals, numbers, and how his strategic foresight had earned him a new bonus. Kendra listened with the kind of detached politeness that only comes from hearing the same monologue 100 times. I kept passing the mashed potatoes, nodding when necessary, but my stomach tightened each time he used the word success. Then, inevitably, the conversation turned toward me. "So, Loretta," he said, swirling his wine like he was performing. "Still keeping up that little savings habit of yours?" Kendra immediately froze mid-bite, her eyes darting toward me. She whispered, "Elliot," in warning. But he continued, smiling like it was harmless banter. "It's just so old-fashioned, you know? You could really make that money work for you if you let me invest it. Compound growth, diversified portfolios." I interrupted softly. "I'm happy with what I have." "Thank you." He chuckled, a low, condescending sound that filled the room like static. "Oh, come on, Loretta. You've got to evolve with the times. These days, leaving money sitting around is practically like throwing it away. It's adorable that you're so disciplined, though. Most people your age just spend." Adorable. There it was again. That same word he'd used before. Like I was some quaint relic. A sentimental fool clutching onto pennies while the world spun ahead. Kendra spoke up this time, her tone sharp. "Elliot, enough. It's her money." He smirked at her, raising his hands in mock surrender. "I'm just saying she could do better. I mean, it's not like she's making much interest in a savings account. We're talking maybe a couple thousand total?" I looked at him quietly for a moment. He had no idea. No idea that I had already reviewed my portfolio days ago and nearly fainted at the number sitting behind my quiet restraint. No idea that while he was busy chasing clients and flaunting borrowed status, I was sitting on more than he'd probably ever touch. I set down my fork, folded my napkin, and smiled. "Elliot," I said calmly, "my tiny savings are doing just fine. You don't need to worry yourself." He laughed, shaking his head. All right, I'm just trying to help, Loretta. You should thank me." That laugh, it was the sound that broke something inside me. For 30 years I'd lived with grace and patience, letting small insults slide, forgiving arrogance where I saw insecurity. But something in that moment shifted. I wasn't angry, not exactly, but I was done pretending that people like Elliot were right about the world. Done letting him treat humility as weakness. I met his gaze and said quietly, "Maybe one day, Elliot, you'll understand that not everyone measures success in numbers." He smiled, missing the weight in my tone completely. "Maybe one day, Loretta, you'll understand that's the only way to measure it." The rest of the dinner felt like a blur. Kendra tried to lighten the mood by changing the subject, but the air was already heavy. I watched her. This beautiful woman I'd raised, shrinking under her husband's arrogance, trying to keep peace at her own birthday table. It broke my heart. When it came time for dessert, I served the lemon meringue pie. It had always been her favorite, bright and sweet, the kind of dessert that felt like sunshine. As I sliced it, I forced a smile and said, "To Kendra, may you always know your worth." She smiled back, though I saw the sadness in her eyes. Elliot clinked his glass lazily against mine. "And to growth," he added smugly. After they left, I stood alone in the quiet kitchen. The dishes sat stacked in the sink, the leftover pie untouched. The clock ticked in steady rhythm, echoing through the silence. I replayed every word in my mind, every smirk, every patronizing tone. And then I thought of Mr. Hillman's words from earlier that week. "You've done remarkably well. $3.4 million. That's what adorable little savings could do." I looked out the window into the darkness and felt something powerful rise within me. This wasn't about pride, it wasn't even about revenge. It was about respect for myself, for the life I'd built, for the lessons I'd lived by while men like Elliot laughed. That night, I made a decision. I would no longer sit quietly while he looked down on me. I would show him. Not through anger or shouting, but through truth. I would make him see the kind of wealth that patience builds, the kind that doesn't glitter, but endures. It would take only one meeting, one moment, one look. I blew out the last candle on the table and whispered to the empty room. "You think you know everything, Elliot, but soon, you'll learn what real wisdom looks like." Then I turned off the lights, my heart calm and steady. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small, I felt ready. That was the moment I decided I would show him the difference between arrogance and wisdom. Revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes, it starts with a calm breath, a pen, and a simple phone call. The morning after Kendra's birthday dinner, the world felt strangely clear to me. I woke up before sunrise, the sky still wrapped in that pale lavender hue that comes right before dawn. I sat at my kitchen table, my tea growing cold as I replayed every word from the night before Elliot's smug laughter. The way he dismissed my life's work with a single adorable. No more, I thought. It wasn't fury that pushed me, it was precision. Years of teaching had taught me that the most effective lessons weren't screamed. They were shown. Elliot was a man who worshipped money, who measured worth in accounts and returns. Fine then. I would teach him in the only language he understood. At 8 o'clock sharp, I called Mr. Hillman. His voice came through the receiver warm and steady, just as it always did. "Mrs. Carver," he said pleasantly, "I was actually just about to call you. How are you this morning?" "I've been better," I admitted with a small laugh. "But I think it's time we make a few adjustments." There was a pause on his end. The kind that comes from long familiarity. "Adjustments," he repeated. "What sort?" "The visible kind," I said. "I want to move a portion of my holdings into a liquid account." "Something more obvious," he chuckled. "Ah, a statement of sorts?" "You could say that," I replied. We arranged to meet that afternoon. When I arrived at the bank, Mr. Hillman greeted me with his usual calm professionalism. His office always smelled faintly of old paper and leather, a comforting scent of stability. He offered me coffee, and I sat across from him while he pulled up my file. "I took the liberty of preparing an overview," he said, sliding a folder toward me. "You've done exceptionally well, Loretta. Conservative choices, long horizons, it all compounded beautifully. You're sitting at roughly 3.4 million, give or take market movement." Even hearing it again still felt surreal. $3.4 million. Built not through risk or luck but through discipline. The thought made me smile not out of pride, but quiet satisfaction. Mr. Hillman adjusted his glasses. "What did you have in mind for the transfer?" "I'd like $500,000 placed in my primary checking," I said. "Something my family can notice, if they happen to be present." He didn't ask for details, though his eyes twinkled with curiosity. "And you'd like me to facilitate this discreetly?" "Precisely. And one more thing, would it be possible to schedule a meeting next week? Perhaps you could invite my son-in-law, Mr. Elliot Banks, to join us under the guise of a consultation?" A slow smile spread across his face. "Ah, now I see what sort of lesson we're planning." I laughed softly. "Let's just call it a clarification." He nodded. "I'll make it happen." I left the bank feeling lighter than I had in years. The wind outside carried a coolness that hinted at the coming autumn, and the leaves along Main Street were beginning to turn amber. Everything around me seemed in motion, changing, like me. That evening, I decided to set the trap. I called Kendra first. "Sweetheart," I said, keeping my voice gentle, I was thinking about moving some of my money around. Maybe into something a little more profitable. Do you think Elliot could spare an hour next week to come with me to the bank? She sounded relieved to hear me reaching out. Of course, he'd love that. He always says you should diversify more. Oh, I bet he does, I thought. Perfect, I said. Tell him Thursday morning. If that works, I'll let Mr. Hillman know. When I hung up, I smiled to myself. Everything was falling neatly into place. Over the next few days, I went about life as usual, but with a subtle thrill humming beneath my calm exterior. I watered my roses, chatted with neighbors, and read in the evenings. Yet my mind kept wandering to the moment when Elliot would finally see the truth. On Wednesday night, Kendra called again to confirm. Mom, Elliot's really excited about tomorrow, she said with a small laugh. He's been going over some investment ideas. He wants to impress you. I'm sure he will, I said softly. I'm sure he will. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not out of anxiety, but anticipation. I lay awake listening to the ticking clock, imagining his expression, the disbelief, the sudden humility. For so long, I'd been on the receiving end of his judgment. Tomorrow, the tables would turn. When morning came, I dressed carefully, not fancy, but intentional. A navy blouse, pearl earrings, and the same leather purse Richard had given me on our 20th anniversary. I wanted to look exactly like the person he always saw. Modest, harmless, ordinary. Elliot arrived 10 minutes early, of course. He was punctual when money was involved. Ready to make that savings grow? He asked cheerfully as he opened the car door for me. I smiled, feigning nervousness. I hope I'm not wasting your time. Not at all, he said. This'll be fun. You'll see how I operate. Maybe I can even help Mr. Hillman get you better returns. The arrogance dripped from every syllable. On the drive to the bank, he talked endlessly about his successful clients, about market trends and insider strategies. I nodded politely, but inside, I was savoring every word. The higher he built his pedestal, the harder his fall would be. When we arrived, the glass doors reflected the morning sun so brightly that for a second, I could barely see. But once inside, the cool air and quiet professionalism grounded me. The tellers greeted me warmly. Good morning, Mrs. Carver. And Elliot looked mildly surprised. You're quite the regular here, he said with a grin. I suppose you could say that, I replied. Mr. Hillman met us in the lobby and led us to his private office. The moment we sat down, Elliot launched into his speech. Mr. Hillman, I've been helping Loretta think about how to better allocate her resources. She's done well saving, but with my expertise. Mr. Hillman raised a hand politely. Of course, let's review what we're working with first, shall we? He opened a folder and began sliding documents across the desk. Elliot leaned forward, glancing at the first page, then the second, and then froze mid-sentence. I watched his brow furrow, his lips part slightly. He blinked and looked again, as if the numbers might change. 3.4 million, clear as day. The silence in the room stretched long enough to taste. I sipped my coffee, calm as a lake. Is everything all right, Elliot? He turned toward me slowly, his voice faint. This is all yours? I smiled faintly. Every penny, my little savings, as you called them. He didn't answer. He just sat there, pale, eyes darting between me and Mr. Hillman, like someone realizing too late that they'd misjudged everything. I turned to the banker. Mr. Hillman, thank you for your time today. I believe that's all I needed. He smiled, understanding the unspoken satisfaction in my tone. As we stood to leave, he extended a hand toward Elliot. It's always a pleasure to meet family of one of our most valued clients. Elliot shook it automatically, still dazed. That handshake, firm, professional, sincere, was the first crack in his ego. And as we stepped back into the sunlight, I thought to myself, the lesson has only just begun. The next time Elliot walked into a bank, he'd walk out a different man. When someone underestimates you, they reveal far more about themselves than they do about you. That's what I kept thinking as I watched Elliot walk out of the bank that day, his jaw tight, his silence thick with disbelief. He drove me home without saying much. The man who could talk for hours about stocks and forecasts suddenly had nothing to say. I sat quietly in the passenger seat, watching the world blur past my window, a faint smile tugging at my lips. I didn't need to say a word. The numbers had spoken for me. When we reached my house, he parked the car and turned toward me. "Loretta," he began slowly, still trying to process it. I had no idea. You never mentioned." I stopped him with a gentle nod. Because it wasn't something I needed to mention. He opened his mouth again but then shut it, as if he couldn't decide whether to apologize or ask more questions. Instead, he forced a small, uneasy smile. "Well, that was impressive. I mean, truly impressive. You've done very well for yourself." I could feel the strain in his voice. He wasn't used to being on this side of the lesson. "Thank you, Elliot," I said simply. "I've always believed in patience." He nodded, then mumbled something about having another meeting to get to. He left quickly, and I stood in my doorway watching his car disappear down the street. For the first time in years, the air felt lighter. But I knew men like Elliot. They didn't change overnight. Their pride just found new ways to disguise itself. And I was right. The very next day, Kendra called me. Her voice was soft, hesitant. "Mom, Elliot told me about the bank meeting. He's kind of embarrassed." I chuckled quietly. "I'm sure he is. He said he didn't realize you were such a serious investor," she continued. "He actually feels bad. He wants to come by tomorrow to talk things through. He said he has an idea that might benefit everyone." "Did he now?" I said. I could practically hear the quotation marks around his words. Benefit everyone, in Elliot's language, meant benefit him and maybe, if convenient, someone else. "Of course, sweetheart," I said. "Tell him I'll make coffee." When he arrived the next afternoon, he came bearing flowers, a habit he'd never had before. A bouquet of white lilies, arranged so precisely it looked like he'd Googled "flowers for forgiveness." "Loretta," he said, stepping inside with that too-wide grin. "I wanted to stop by and, clear the air. I think we got off on the wrong foot yesterday." "I didn't know we were on the wrong one," I replied lightly, taking the flowers. "But thank you, they're lovely." He followed me into the kitchen, where the scent of fresh cinnamon rolls filled the air. I poured 2 cups of coffee and gestured for him to sit. For a few moments, he danced around small talk, how work had been busy, how Kendra was doing well, how interest rates were all over the place these days. I waited patiently, knowing exactly where this was going. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Loretta, I have to say, I was blown away by what I saw at the bank. 3.4 million? That's incredible. You've done better than most people I know." I smiled faintly. "Thank you, Elliot. I suppose steady persistence pays off." "Exactly," he said quickly, leaning forward. "That's why I wanted to talk to you. You've already done the hard part, building capital. But now, if we play this right, we could make it grow even more. I could help you manage part of it. No fees, no strings. Just a family arrangement." There it was. The pivot from embarrassment to opportunity. "Help me manage it?" I asked, tilting my head. "Yes," he said eagerly. "See, with my firm's connections, I can get access to private investment opportunities, real estate deals, early-stage funds, things you won't find at a regular bank. We could easily double your portfolio in 5 years, maybe less." "We," I repeated softly, stirring my coffee. "Well," he said with a shrug and a grin, "it'd be mutually beneficial. You get better returns, I get a new client though, of course, I wouldn't treat you like one." I looked at him carefully. He meant every word. Not because he wanted to help, but because he couldn't stand the idea of me having something he didn't control. Men like Elliot saw money as power, and power as ownership. "Elliot," I said slowly, "that's very kind of you. But Mr. Hillman has managed my finances for decades. I trust him completely." He laughed softly, a sound that was meant to be charming but came out strained. Of course. I'm not suggesting you fire him. I just think I could complement his work. You know, Bring in a modern perspective. I smiled sweetly. Modern perspective. That's what you call it, huh? He looked at me uncertainly, unsure if I was teasing. Elliot. I continued gently. I appreciate your enthusiasm. But I've learned something over the years. The moment money becomes a competition, someone loses more than they gain. He tried to maintain his composure, but I could see the flicker of frustration behind his polite expression. I'm just offering to help, Loretta. I know, I said softly. But you see, I don't need help. I need peace. And that's something money doesn't buy. He sat back, fidgeting with his watch. You know, I was only trying to make things easier for you. Oh, I know you were, I said, standing to refill my cup. But Elliot, what you don't realize is that I already made things easier for myself a long time ago by not letting anyone else handle my future. That landed harder than I expected. He looked down, his jaw tightening. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. When he finally stood to leave, his smile had turned brittle. Well, he said, if you ever change your mind, the offer stands. I only want what's best for the family. I nodded, walking him to the door. And I only want what's fair. He blinked, unsure how to take that. Then he nodded stiffly and left. I watched from the window as he got into his car. The confident stride he usually had was gone, replaced by something uncertain. For the first time, Elliot looked small. I sat back down at the kitchen table, the untouched cinnamon roll still steaming. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the quiet rush of satisfaction. Elliot had tried to regain the upper hand, to wrap his greed in good intentions, but the truth was written all over his face. He couldn't stand that I didn't need him. And that, I realized, was the cruelest lesson of all. When I told Kendra later that evening how the visit went, she sighed. He means well, Mom. He just doesn't like feeling out of control. I know, sweetheart, I said. But sometimes, losing control is how people finally learn. That night, as I washed the coffee cups and turned off the lights, I couldn't help but smile. Elliot thought the game was over. But I knew better. The real lesson was still to come, and when it did, he wouldn't be able to talk his way out of it. He had no idea that my savings already meant more than his entire net worth. The air inside that bank was thick with irony. It was a crisp Thursday morning when Elliot and I pulled into the parking lot, sunlight glinting off the chrome of his car as if the day itself was daring him to shine. He had that same swagger I'd seen at every family gathering, shoulders back, chin high, a man who believed confidence was the same thing as competence. He had no idea what was waiting for him on the other side of those glass doors. Ready, Loretta? He asked, flashing me a grin that was just a touch too polished. This'll be quick. I'll handle most of the talking, I smiled faintly. I'm sure you will. Inside, the bank lobby smelled faintly of pine polish and printer ink. The tellers smiled at me, most of them knew me by name after all these years. One of the newer clerks even called out, "Good morning, Mrs. Carver," as we walked in. Elliot looked surprised, as though he couldn't quite imagine me having a presence here. Miss Hillman appeared moments later, his gray suit perfectly pressed, his movements steady and deliberate. "Miss Carver," he greeted warmly, extending his hand. "It's always a pleasure. And this must be your son-in-law?" "Yes," I said, gesturing toward him. "This is Elliot Banks. He's been kind enough to offer some advice about my financial planning." Elliot's handshake was firm, confident, the handshake of a man who thought he was the smartest in the room. "Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Hillman," he said smoothly. "Loretta's told me you've been managing her savings for quite some time." Mr. Hillman gave him a polite, measured smile. "Indeed, why don't we step into my office?" The moment the door closed behind us, Elliot launched right into his pitch. He didn't even wait for Mr. Hillman to sit down. "So, here's what I'm thinking," he began, pacing slightly. "Loretta's portfolio could be producing a higher yield if we restructure her accounts. Too much is sitting in low-interest products. With my firm, we specialize in more active management, something to really make her capital work harder." Mr. Hillman listened patiently, his hands folded on the desk. I sat quietly beside him, watching Elliot with the calm of someone who already knows how the story ends. When he finally paused for breath, Mr. Hillman nodded slowly. "That's quite a plan, Mr. Banks. But perhaps before we discuss restructuring, it would be helpful if you had a clearer picture of Mrs. Carver's holdings." Elliot waved a hand dismissively. Sure, whatever she's got, probably a few accounts, right?" Mr. Hillman smiled faintly. "A few. Yes." He turned to me. "Would you like me to provide the updated summary, Mrs. Carver?" I nodded. "Please do." He reached into his drawer and pulled out a thick folder far thicker than Elliot had expected. He opened it, spreading several neatly printed statements across the mahogany desk. The sound of the papers sliding against the surface seemed to echo louder than it should have. Elliot leaned forward, casual at first. Then his brow furrowed. His eyes moved quickly over the pages once, twice, and then he froze. He blinked, then blinked again. His mouth parted slightly, but no words came out. I sipped my coffee, pretending not to notice. "Something wrong, Elliot?" I asked softly. He didn't answer. He just stared at the numbers like they couldn't possibly be real. Finally, he cleared his throat. This can't be right." Mr. Hillman raised an eyebrow. "Oh, it's quite right. Mrs. Carver's been one of our most consistent investors for nearly 2 decades. Her accounts have performed extraordinarily well." Elliot's eyes darted toward me, disbelief still written across his face. You've had all this? All these years?" I smiled, calm and measured. "I told you I believed in patience." He ran a hand over his mouth, trying to compose himself. 3.4 million? He muttered under his breath, as though saying it aloud might make it less true. Mr. Hillman went on, professional as ever. "In addition to her investments, Mrs. Carver maintains several long-term municipal bond holdings, a diversified real estate trust, and, as of last week, a $500,000 checking balance for personal use." Elliot looked up sharply at that last part. $500,000 in checking? I met his gaze evenly. Yes. I wanted something accessible for projects. The silence that followed was heavy, almost reverent. Even the faint hum of the air conditioning seemed distant. Elliot leaned back slowly, the confidence draining from his posture like water slipping through his fingers. For once, he didn't have a comeback. No clever remark, no patronizing advice. Just quiet shock. Mr. Hillman glanced between us, then offered a polite smile. "Mrs. Carver, I believe that covers your review for today. Was there anything else you wanted to discuss?" "No, thank you," I said, standing. That was more than enough. As I reached for my purse, Mr. Hillman turned to Elliot and extended his hand. "Mr. Banks, it's always nice to meet family of one of our most valued clients." Elliot hesitated for half a second, then shook his hand. His grip, which was usually firm and self-assured, looked weak, now awkward, uncertain. "Likewise," he mumbled. When we stepped out of the office, the brightness of the lobby seemed almost blinding after the quiet intensity of that room. Elliot's face was pale, his movements stiff. He walked quickly, as though the marble floor itself might swallow him whole if he stayed too long. Outside, I paused to take in the crisp air, while Elliot stood beside me, silent. The confident man who'd strutted into that bank was gone, replaced by someone quieter, smaller. On the ride home, neither of us spoke for the first few miles. Finally, he muttered, "You really blindsided me in there." "Did I?" I asked softly. "I thought you were the one who wanted to help me with my money." He let out a dry laugh. "I guess I deserved that." "You didn't deserve anything, Elliot," I said, turning to face him. "You just learned something most people never do." He looked over, wary. "And what's that?" "That wealth isn't about being loud," I said. "It's about being steady. It's about not needing anyone's validation." He gripped the steering wheel tighter but didn't reply. When we finally pulled into my driveway, I turned to him before getting out. "Elliot," I said quietly, "you've spent years thinking I was small, but small things, when done right, become mountains over time. Remember that." He nodded slowly, eyes downcast. "I will." As I closed the car door, I saw him sit there for a few seconds longer, his head resting against the steering wheel. It was the first time I'd ever seen him truly silent, not out of arrogance, but reflection. I walked up to my porch, the breeze rustling the wind chimes above me. The world looked exactly the same, but something fundamental had shifted. Inside, I poured myself a fresh cup of tea, savoring the quiet. I didn't feel vindictive, I didn't even feel triumphant. Just balanced. The scales had finally evened out, and for the first time since Elliot had entered our lives, I felt like I could breathe freely again. Because sometimes the sweetest victories are the ones that require no words at all, just a handshake and the truth laid bare. For the first time, I watched Elliot run out of words, and it was glorious. There are moments in life that carve themselves so deeply into your memory that even years later, you can recall the smallest details, the scent in the air, the sound of someone breathing beside you, the faint hum of fluorescent lights above. For me, it was that handshake. The sound of Mr. Hillman's voice, the look in Elliot's eyes, and the quiet dignity that wrapped itself around the moment like velvet. That handshake would echo in my mind for years to come. After we left Mr. Hillman's office, the world outside felt brighter somehow. Maybe it was just the sunlight glinting off the marble floors of the bank's lobby, or maybe it was something inside me finally lifting. Either way, I felt lighter, steadier. Elliot, on the other hand, walked as though each step weighed him down. We paused by the door, and Mr. Hillman followed us out, still the perfect professional. "Mrs. Carver," he said warmly, "it's always a pleasure to see you. We'll proceed with the reallocation you requested next week?" "Yes, please," I replied. "And thank you for everything." He turned to Elliot then, extending his hand again. "Mr. Banks, it's been a pleasure meeting you. It's always nice to meet the family of one of our most valued clients." Elliot hesitated. Just for a second, but it was enough for me to see it. His fingers twitched slightly, as though his pride were fighting the simple act of reaching forward. But finally, he took the banker's hand. "Of course," he said, his voice quieter than usual. Hillman's handshake was firm, dignified, the kind that spoke of mutual respect. But between the two of them, there was only one man who had earned it. I saw Elliot's expression flicker, as if he'd just realized it too. When we stepped outside, the morning air was cool and sharp. For once, I didn't rush. I let the silence stretch, watching cars glide past and leaves tremble on the trees lining the street. Elliot stood beside me, his shoulders slightly slumped. "That was unexpected," he finally said. I smiled faintly. "Was it?" He turned to me, frowning. "You could have told me, Loretta. You could have said you had that kind of money." I tilted my head. "And what would that have changed?" He opened his mouth, but no words came. He didn't have an answer because the truth was, it would have changed everything for him. He would have treated me differently, not out of respect but out of calculation. And that was exactly why I'd never told him. I just didn't expect. He trailed off, looking away. I guess I made assumptions. I let him sit with that. We walked to the car, and for the first time since I'd known him, Elliot opened the door for me without any trace of forced politeness. It wasn't courtesy. It was humility. Quiet, awkward humility. As we drove away, he was unusually quiet. His hands gripped the wheel, and his eyes stayed fixed on the road ahead. Every so often, he would glance at me, like he was trying to reconcile the version of me he'd just seen with the image he'd held for years, the harmless, thrifty mother-in-law who didn't understand real money. Finally, he spoke. "You really managed all that on your own?" I smiled, turning my gaze toward the passing trees. "Not entirely. Mr. Hillman helped, but I made the decisions. I just chose consistency over chaos. Not everything needs to be exciting to be successful." He nodded slowly. "Guess I never thought of it that way." "I know," I said gently. "You're from a world where loud means powerful. But the truth is, quiet is often stronger." He didn't respond. but I saw his jaw tighten. He wasn't used to being the one learning the lesson. When we reached my house, I invited him in for tea, mostly because I wanted him to sit with what had happened instead of running from it. He hesitated but followed me inside. The kitchen smelled of vanilla and lemon, the remnants of a cake I'd baked earlier in the week. As the kettle warmed, I busied myself with teacups and sugar while he sat at the table, his fingers drumming absently against the wood. "You know," he said finally. "I wasn't trying to insult you before. I just thought you could do better." I turned, placing the steaming cup in front of him. "Better by whose standards, Elliot? Yours?" he sighed. "Maybe. Money's always been how I measure things. Success, stability, security." "That's not stability," I interrupted softly. "That's fear. You chase money because you think if you ever stop, everything will fall apart." He looked up sharply, startled by the accuracy of it. "I've seen men like you my whole life," I continued. "Good men, smart men. But you let your worth get tangled up with numbers on a screen. And when someone doesn't play that game, you call them naive." He looked down at his cup. The steam fogged his glasses, slightly, and for once, he didn't rush to defend himself. "Loretta," he said quietly, "I really didn't mean to make you feel small." I smiled faintly. "I know. But you did. And maybe that's exactly what needed to happen for both of us." He gave a weak laugh. "You really taught me a lesson today, didn't you?" "I didn't teach you," I said. "You just learned." We sat in silence after that, sipping our tea. There was a heaviness in the air, but it wasn't hostility. It was humility, the rare kind that can only come when someone realizes they've been wrong for a long time. When he stood to leave, I walked him to the door. He paused before stepping outside, turning to me with an expression I'd never seen on him before, something almost like respect. "You're a remarkable woman, Loretta," he said quietly. "I'll admit, I misjudged you." I smiled. "It happens to the best of us." He nodded once, then headed to his car. As he drove away, I watched from the porch, the late morning sun glinting off the windshield until he turned the corner and disappeared. I leaned against the railing, the wind rustling the hem of my blouse. My heart wasn't racing with triumph. It was calm. Steady. Revenge hadn't felt like fire, it had felt like clarity. Inside, I sat at the same kitchen table where I'd planned everything. The folder from the bank still sat neatly on the counter, a quiet testament to everything I'd built. I ran my fingers along its edge, smiling to myself. It wasn't about the money. It never had been. It was about dignity, about reminding both of us that underestimating someone's quiet strength is the gravest mistake a person can make. And that handshake, the one that left Elliot pale and speechless, was proof that sometimes the most powerful blows are delivered without anger, without a raised voice, and without revenge shouted from rooftops. Sometimes all it takes is a single, dignified moment of truth. The sound of that handshake will echo in my memory forever. Some silences carry more meaning than 1,000 apologies. That drive home from the bank was one of them. Elliot didn't start the car right away. He just sat there in the parking lot, staring out the windshield with both hands gripping the steering wheel. The usual confidence that poured out of him like a well-rehearsed performance was gone. He looked human, unsteady, humbled. I didn't rush him. I simply sat there, hands folded in my lap, the faint hum of the air conditioner filling the silence between us. Outside, the morning sun was already climbing higher, casting bright patterns across the dashboard. It felt poetic somehow, like the world itself was shining light on everything that had just been revealed. Finally, after what felt like minutes of stillness, he spoke. His voice was lower than usual, stripped of its usual bravado. "I had no idea," he said quietly. 3.4 million. That's unreal." I turned to look at him, studying his expression. The disbelief was genuine. He wasn't angry, just disoriented, like a man trying to rewrite everything he thought he knew. "I never needed anyone to know," I replied softly. "It wasn't about the number, Elliot. It was about knowing I could take care of myself." He nodded slowly, eyes still on the road. I just always assumed you lived on a fixed pension or something. I didn't think you had. He stopped himself, shaking his head. God, I sound awful. I gave a small laugh. Yes, I said, you did. He glanced at me then. And for a moment there was something new in his eyes, not pity, not pride, but genuine respect. The kind that only comes after a person has been thoroughly, undeniably humbled. We drove in silence for a while, the city fading into open roads and quiet neighborhoods. Every so often I'd catch him glancing at me like he still couldn't believe the woman beside him, the one he'd mocked for her tiny savings, was sitting on a fortune that could have easily dwarfed his own. You must think I'm such a fool, he finally said. I looked out the window, the trees rushing past in a blur of green. No, Elliot, I said. I think you're just a man who confuses noise with value. He furrowed his brow. What do you mean? You live in a world where people equate loudness with success, I explained. Fancy cars, big houses, the right watch, the right contacts. But the loudest people are often the most insecure. Real stability doesn't have to prove itself. He didn't argue, and that was how I knew the lesson had landed. By the time we reached my neighborhood, he'd gone completely quiet. He pulled into my driveway carefully, as if unsure how to behave now that he knew what I was really worth. As I reached for the door handle, he said, Loretta, can I ask you something? Of course, I said, turning to face him. Why didn't you ever tell Kendra, or me, about any of this? I smiled. Because it wasn't your information to use. He looked confused, so I continued. Some things are sacred, Elliot. I saved that money to protect myself. Not to impress anyone. I didn't tell Kendra because I didn't want her to treat me differently. And I didn't tell you because... I paused, letting my gaze meet his. Because you wouldn't have understood. He swallowed hard, nodding. You're right, I wouldn't have. I could hear the honesty in his voice, and for the first time, I didn't feel anger toward him. I felt pity. Not the kind that looks down on someone, but the kind that comes from knowing they've built their life on fragile foundations. You know, I said softly. Richard used to tell me something before he passed. He said, Loretta, never confuse pride with strength. Pride breaks, strength bends. Elliot exhaled. A long, weary sound. He was right. Yes. I said. He usually was. We sat in silence again, and I realized how different that silence was from the one we'd started the drive with. The first had been heavy, tense. This one was still contemplative. Something inside him had shifted. I could feel it. Before I got out of the car, I placed a hand on his arm. You're not a bad man, Elliot, but you let arrogance blind you. Don't make that mistake again. He looked at me, really looked at me, and nodded. I won't. I gave him a small smile, then opened the door. The crisp air felt refreshing as I stepped onto the pavement. Drive safe, I said before closing it behind me. He sat there for a moment, engine idling, before finally pulling away. As his car disappeared down the street, I stood on my porch and exhaled a long breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The world was quiet again, just how I liked it. That afternoon, Kendra called. I could hear the curiosity in her voice before she even asked the question. Mom, she said cautiously. Elliot told me what happened at the bank. Is it true? You really have... all that money? I smiled to myself. Yes, sweetheart, it's true. Why didn't you ever say anything? She asked softly. Because I didn't want to be treated like a number. I replied. I wanted to be your mom, not a portfolio. There was a pause on the other end, then a quiet sniffle. I'm so proud of you, Mom. You've always been stronger than anyone gives you credit for. Thank you, darling, I said, my chest tightening with emotion. And if you remember anything from this, let it be this. Being quiet doesn't mean being small. Sometimes the smallest seeds grow the tallest trees. We spoke for a while longer before saying goodbye. When I hung up, the house felt warm and peaceful. I poured myself a cup of tea, sat by the window, and watched the sun dip low behind the trees. Elliot's silence had said more than any apology could. He'd seen me now not as a frail woman with modest dreams, but as someone who had built her own security, brick by brick, without ever needing to brag about it. And while I didn't set out to humiliate him, I couldn't deny the quiet satisfaction that lingered. Not because I'd proven him wrong, but because I'd proven me right. For years I'd doubted myself whenever people like him dismissed my carefulness as outdated. I'd wondered if I'd been too cautious, too reserved. But now, I finally had proof that patience, my kind of patience, wasn't weakness. It was wisdom. That night, I slept deeply. For the first time in years, my dreams were still, undisturbed by worry or resentment. I woke the next morning feeling lighter than air. Elliot might never fully understand the lesson he'd been given, but that didn't matter. The seed had been planted, and life had a way of making those seeds grow in time. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. Elliot wasn't done, at least. Not yet. Arrogance doesn't vanish overnight, it just hides behind guilt for a while. For a few weeks after the bank meeting, Elliot behaved like a completely different man. Gone was the smug, talkative son-in-law who measured every conversation in dollar signs. In his place was someone quieter, more thoughtful, or at least pretending to be. At first, I didn't trust it. People don't shed old habits that easily. But I'll admit, it was nice to have peace for once. He began stopping by my house more often, always under the guise of helping out. One afternoon, he showed up with a box of tools and insisted on fixing the squeaky back door. Another day, he trimmed the hedges and claimed he'd been meaning to spend more time outdoors. Kendra told me he was trying, that he felt terrible about how he'd treated me. I wanted to believe her. I really did. One Saturday morning, I looked out my kitchen window and found him washing my car. Soap bubbles covered the driveway, and he was humming to himself like a man trying too hard to look content. When I stepped outside, he straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag. "Thought I'd save you a trip to the car wash," he said. "That's kind of you," I replied, leaning against the porch railing. "You don't have to do that, you know." "I want to," he said quickly. Then, after a pause, "I've been doing a lot of thinking lately." "Oh?" "About what matters. About how I've been chasing things that don't really mean much." He gave a self-deprecating chuckle. "You were right, Loretta. I've been loud for the sake of being loud." His words were sincere, or at least practiced well enough to sound that way. But there was something in his eyes, something calculating that told me this wasn't just about guilt, it was about control. He couldn't stand being on the outside looking in. The following week, he stopped by again with a folder under his arm. "I've been sketching some ideas," he said as he set it on the kitchen table. "Business proposals, really, but I thought maybe you'd want to take a look. You've got an investor's eye." I smiled politely. "I'm flattered." He opened the folder, revealing charts, projections, and glossy printouts of high-rise developments. "See, the market's shifting," he began eagerly. "There are opportunities right now for people who have liquidity. You could double your returns in 18 months if you know where to look." There, it was the same glimmer in his eyes I'd seen so many times before. Greed dressed up as ambition. "Elliot," I said carefully, "I'm retired. I don't need to double anything." He laughed lightly. Of course, but think of it as a legacy. You could build something that lasts." "I already did," I said softly. "It's sitting in that scholarship fund and in my daughter's happiness." He hesitated, clearly frustrated by my daughter. Calmness. "I'm just saying, I could help manage some of your assets, relieve you of the hassle. You've got a lot on your plate now." "Mr. Hillman does just fine," I said. "And I don't find it a hassle to watch my money grow quietly." He leaned back, crossing his arms. The charm faded slightly. "You don't trust me, do you?" I met his gaze. "Should I?" For a moment, we just stared at each other. Then he sighed, trying to soften the tension. "Fair enough," he said. "I guess I earned that." But his eyes told a different story. They were sharp, restless. Later that night, I told Kendra about our conversation. She sighed, clearly torn. Mom, he's been different lately. I think he's genuinely trying. Maybe, I said. Though I didn't believe it. But some people don't change, they just adapt. A few days later, I got proof of that. Elliot stopped by unexpectedly one evening, this time carrying a sleek leather briefcase. He was dressed too well for casual conversation, pressed shirt, polished shoes, even a hint of cologne. He walked in smiling. I was in the area, he said. Thought I'd drop by. In a suit? I asked, arching an eyebrow. He laughed. Old habits die hard. Listen, Loretta. I've been thinking. I want to make amends for how I acted before. I really do. That's good to hear. I was wondering, he continued, if maybe you'd consider letting me handle a small portion of your investments. Just a test run. Nothing major, maybe 50,000 or so. I'd put it into something safe, conservative, so you can see I'm serious about earning your trust. There it was the pitch. I looked at him steadily. Elliot, do you know what happens when you touch something fragile before it's ready? He frowned. What? It breaks, I said quietly. And my trust is fragile. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. You don't have to make it sound like I'm some kind of villain. I don't think you're a villain, I said. I think you're a man who's afraid of being ordinary. His jaw tightened. You really think that's what this is? Yes, I said. You built your life on the idea that you're smarter than everyone else, but now you've met someone who's not playing your game and you don't know how to handle it. He didn't reply. He just stared at me for a long moment before finally gathering his briefcase. You know, he said quietly. I'm trying to change. You don't make it easy. Real change never is, I said. He left without another word. After he drove off, I sat at the table. The faint smell of his cologne lingering in the air. Part of me almost felt sorry for him. He was like a man standing at the edge of something vast, terrified to look down, because he might finally see how small he really was. The following week, Kendra invited me over for dinner. She seemed lighter, happier, relieved even. But I could sense the tension behind her smile. Eventually, she confided, Elliot's been really restless lately. He's worried about money. Some of his investments didn't go as planned. I listened quietly. So that was it. His sudden politeness, the over-eager helpfulness, the new leaf routine, it was all part of a larger story. Greed doesn't vanish. It just disguises itself until it finds another opportunity. And I had a sinking feeling that opportunity, in his mind, was still me. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the unease. I'd shown Elliot a glimpse of humility, but not enough to cure him of his addiction to control. He was a man who needed to feel powerful, and losing that especially to me was something he couldn't live with for long. The next chapter of his transformation, I knew, would be the most revealing. Because guilt fades, arrogance waits, and sooner or later, one of them always wins. The mask of humility was about to crack wide open. Sometimes revenge doesn't need a plan, greed writes it for you. It was a quiet Thursday morning when I got the call that would unravel everything. I was in the garden, pruning my roses, when my phone buzzed in my apron pocket. The screen lit up with Kendra's name, and the sound of her voice the moment I answered made my heart drop. Mom, she said, her tone shaky, on the edge of tears. Can you come over? Please? I wiped my hands on my jeans. What's wrong, sweetheart? It's Elliot. It's bad. Please just come. Those words, it's bad, sent a chill down my spine. When I got to their house, Kendra was sitting at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of untouched coffee. Her eyes were red, and tissues littered the counter. Elliot wasn't there. What happened? I asked softly, placing a hand on her shoulder. She looked up at me, her voice trembling. He lost our savings, Mom, all of it. I froze. What do you mean, lost? She took a shaky breath. He invested it in some business deal with a friend, some kind of development project. He said it was a sure thing, that it'd triple our money in 6 months. But it collapsed. Everything's gone. That word hit me like a punch. I pulled out a chair and sat beside her. Did he tell you before he invested it? Her face crumpled. No. I only found out when the bank called this morning. Our joint account was empty except for a few $100s. Anger burned in my chest, hot and immediate, but I kept my voice calm. Where is he now? She wiped her eyes. He went to talk to one of his partners. He said he'd fix it. Fix it. I knew what that meant. Men like Elliot didn't fix things. They covered them. That evening, when he finally came home, his usual smooth confidence had been replaced by a nervous energy. His tie was loosened, and his face was pale. He froze when he saw me sitting there beside Kendra. Loretta, he said cautiously. I didn't expect to see you here. I'm sure you didn't, I said. Why don't you tell me what happened? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. It was supposed to be solid, okay? I did my research. The numbers checked out. But the developer pulled out last minute, and the whole thing fell apart. I'll get it back, I just need time. Time? Time? Kendra snapped. You promised me you wouldn't touch that money again. I had to, Kendra, he shouted. You don't understand. It was an opportunity, a real one. An opportunity to destroy our future? She yelled, tears spilling again. I raised a hand gently. Enough. Yelling won't fix this. I turned to him. Elliot, how much are we talking about? He hesitated, then said quietly, a little over 200,000. Kendra gasped, covering her mouth. Oh my God. I closed my eyes for a moment, forcing myself to breathe. You took her trust, her security, and gambled it away. Why? He looked at me desperately. Because I was drowning, Loretta. My clients have been pulling out, and the firm's been cutting hours. I thought if I made one big win, I could get ahead again. I thought, you thought wrong. I interrupted. He dropped into a chair, burying his face in his hands. I messed up, I know that, but I can fix it. I studied him quietly. And how do you plan to fix it, Elliot? You can't gamble your way out of debt. He looked up then, eyes red, voice low. I was hoping, he swallowed hard. I was hoping you might lend me something, just to cover the gap. Temporarily. I swear, I'll pay it back. There it was, the true reason behind his sudden humility. His helpfulness. His guilt. This was the endgame all along. My hands tightened in my lap. You mocked my savings, Elliot. You told me my discipline was adorable. And now you want to borrow from me? He winced. That's not fair. No, I said coldly. What's not fair is what you did to my daughter. I'm trying to make things right. I know I've made mistakes, but you don't have to make me feel like garbage for it. Then stop acting like garbage, I said sharply. Kendra looked between us, her voice trembling. Please, stop. The silence that followed was thick and heavy. Elliot finally sat down again, his voice small. Please, Loretta, I just need 50,000. That's all. You have millions sitting in that account. It wouldn't even hurt you. I stared at him, my anger turning cold and precise. You think money is what hurts people? You're wrong. It's betrayal that hurts. It's breaking trust so casually that it feels like it never mattered. His jaw clenched. You don't understand. I did it for us, for the family. For the family? I repeated, my tone sharp enough to slice through the air. You destroyed your own family's savings. Don't insult me by pretending this was selfless. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. I stood then, straightening my shoulders. You know what's ironic, Elliot? You spent years looking down on me for being careful, for saving, for planning. You called it small-minded. But my tiny savings would have saved you if I trusted you enough to share it, and that's something you'll never get back. He stared at me, speechless. I looked to Kendra, her face streaked with tears. Sweetheart, come stay with me for a while. You need space to think. She hesitated, glancing at her husband. He said nothing. He just looked deflated. When we left, he didn't follow us. That night, as Kendra slept in the guest room, I sat alone in the living room, staring out the window at the quiet street. My mind raced, not with guilt, but with clarity. This was the breaking point. Elliot had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. He'd not only destroyed Kendra's trust but had the audacity to ask me, of all people, to clean up his mess. But I wasn't angry anymore. Not in the burning, vengeful way. What I felt was colder, calmer, a sense of justice that didn't need shouting. I decided right then that I would give him exactly what he'd earned. The next time Elliot came to me for help, I'd be ready. He thought I was done teaching him lessons. He was wrong. If he thought my lesson was over, he was about to learn its cruelest chapter. Sometimes the most painful answer you can give someone is no. After that night, Kendra stayed with me for a while. At first, she cried herself to sleep on the couch, curled under one of Richard's old quilts. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and find her sitting by the window, staring into the dark. She was too heartbroken to talk, but she didn't need to. I knew that kind of pain, the kind that comes when the person you trust most betrays you so completely that even breathing feels heavier. A few days passed before I heard from Elliot. He didn't call Kendra, he called me. His voice on the phone was weary, almost hoarse. "Loretta," he said. "Please, can we talk?" I hesitated for a moment, then agreed. "Dinner. Tomorrow night. Just you and me." He sounded relieved, maybe even hopeful. "Thank you," he said softly. "You won't regret it." Oh, I was certain I wouldn't. The next evening, I set the table for two. Nothing fancy, just roast chicken, green beans, and mashed potatoes. I wanted it to feel familiar, disarming. If he thought this was going to be another opportunity to charm his way out of accountability, I wanted him to be comfortable enough to lower his guard. When he arrived, he was dressed impeccably. He always dressed well, even when he was falling apart. His tie was perfectly knotted, his hair carefully combed, but the exhaustion in his eyes betrayed the image. He looked thinner, older. "Loretta," he said, forcing a smile as I opened the door. "You look lovely." "Come in, Elliot," I said coolly. "Dinner's ready." He stepped inside, looking around nervously as if expecting Kendra to appear. When she didn't, he seemed to relax slightly. We sat down, and for a while, I let him eat in peace. He devoured the food like a man who hadn't had a proper meal in days. When his plate was nearly empty, I set down my fork and folded my hands on the table. "So," I said quietly, "you wanted to talk?" He nodded, wiping his mouth with a napkin. "I know I've messed everything up," he said. "I was stupid, reckless. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want to make things right." I stayed silent, watching him twist his wedding ring nervously. "I love Kendra," he continued. "I know I've hurt her. He exhaled shakily. "I'm trying to fix what I broke. I can't do it alone." There it was again. The plea. The subtle manipulation hiding behind guilt. I leaned back slightly, studying him. "What exactly are you asking for?" He hesitated, then met my eyes. "I need help, Loretta. Financial help. Just something to get me back on my feet until I can rebuild." I sighed softly. "You're asking me for money again." He looked down. "Yes." I waited a long moment before replying. "Elliot," I said slowly, "you told me once that my savings were too small to matter. You laughed at the idea that caution could be valuable. Tell me, what do you think now?" He swallowed hard. "I think I was wrong." "About what exactly?" "About everything," he said quickly. "About you, about money, about pride." I let him sit in that confession for a moment before I spoke again. "You want me to help you," I said. All right. I'll make you an offer. His head snapped up, relief flooding his face. Anything. I'll do, and anything. Good, I said. Then listen carefully. I reached into a folder I'd placed on the counter earlier and slid it toward him. Inside was a short document, a proposal I'd written up with Mr. Hillman's help. At the top was a title, The Carver Future Scholars Program. He frowned. What's this? A charity fund, I said. I'm starting it to support underprivileged high school students who want to go to college but can't afford it. He blinked. That's great, Loretta. But what does this have to do with me? I want you to manage it, I said. He looked stunned. You want me to wait? You're offering me a job? Yes, I said. A legitimate one. You'll oversee the administrative side tracking donations, handling outreach, basic accounting. You'll report directly to me and Mr. Hillman. The salary is modest, but it's honest. He stared at me, completely thrown off balance. You're serious? Entirely. He laughed weakly. Loretta. Come on. I can't work for you. Why not? I asked, tilting my head. You said you wanted to make things right. Here's your chance. You can use your skills for something meaningful. His face reddened. Because it's humiliating. You want me to sit behind a desk? Answering to you? After everything, remember. He stopped himself, realizing too late how arrogant it sounded. I leaned forward. After everything what, Elliot? After you lost your wife's savings? After you asked me for money? You wanted help. This is help. Honest work in exchange for a paycheck. Or did you want charity without effort? He clenched his jaw, staring down at the table. You're doing this to punish me. No, I said calmly. I'm doing this to give you a way to earn back the dignity you threw away. He didn't respond. The silence stretched long between us. I could almost hear his pride cracking under the weight of the truth. Finally, he pushed the 5-folder back toward me. I can't, he said softly. I can't take this. I nodded slowly. I know. He looked up, confused. You can't take it because you'd rather live in shame than swallow your pride, I said. And that's the difference between you and me, Elliot. I spent my whole life learning that pride doesn't pay bills, but humility can build empires. He stood abruptly, anger flickering behind his eyes. You think you're better than me? No, I said evenly. I just stopped pretending that money makes anyone better than anyone else. For a moment, he stood there, breathing heavily, as if trying to decide whether to yell or leave. In the end, he just straightened his jacket and said quietly, You'll regret this. I smiled sadly. No, Elliot, I think you will. He left without another word, the door closing softly behind him. I watched from the window as he walked down the path, his once confident stride replaced by something uncertain. A strange mixture of relief and sorrow washed over me. I didn't feel triumphant, just finished. The game was over, and this time, I wasn't the one who'd lost. Kendra came home later that night, her face tired but peaceful. She asked how the dinner went. I told her the truth. I offered him a chance to start over. He said no. She nodded slowly, tears welling in her eyes. Then he's made his choice. Yes, I said softly. And so have we. That night, she packed a small bag of her things from his house. She didn't cry when she left. She just looked around one last time and said quietly, I'm done waiting for him to change. As we drove home together, I glanced over at her. For the first time in months, her shoulders weren't hunched in fear, they were straight, strong. And as for me, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not because I'd won, but because I'd done the right thing. Elliot would have to live with the consequences of his pride. I didn't need to destroy him. Life would handle that for me. Elliot had lost everything except the memory of my smile. Out of pain, something beautiful can still grow. The weeks that followed were some of the calmest I'd had in years. The storm had passed, the shouting had quieted. The air inside my home felt light again, the way it used to when Richard was alive and laughter still lived in the walls. Kendra slowly began to heal. She moved her things into the spare room and started helping around the house, watering the garden, cooking, even reading on the porch with me in the evenings. Every day she smiled a little more. It wasn't an easy recovery, but there was strength in her that reminded me of myself at her age, bruised, but unbroken. And as for me, I had work to do. A week after that final dinner with Elliot, I met with Mr. Hillman at the bank. We sat in his office again, that same calm place where everything had begun. He looked at me over his glasses and smiled. "So, Mrs. Carver," he said, "I understand you're ready to begin your next project?" I nodded. "Yes, it's time." Together, we finalized the Carver Future Scholars Program, a scholarship fund I'd been dreaming about for years but had never quite found the courage to start. It was simple: small grants to help bright, hard-working high school students afford college. Nothing extravagant, just enough to make sure money wouldn't be the thing that stopped a young person from chasing a dream. Mr. Hillman helped me set up a trust, manage the paperwork, and establish an oversight board. "You're doing a remarkable thing, Loretta," he said as he signed the final document. "You'll change lives," I smiled. "Maybe. But more than that, I'll be reminding a few people that slow, steady effort can outlast arrogance every single time." Within a few months, the scholarship became official. We held a small event at the community center to announce the first round of recipients. I remember standing at the podium, my hands trembling slightly as I spoke to a crowd of parents, students, and local reporters. "I spent my career teaching children how to believe in themselves," I said. "Now I want to help them build the futures they deserve." The applause was warm and genuine, but what touched me most were the students themselves, wide-eyed, hopeful, their entire lives stretching ahead of them. I saw in them the same quiet determination that had carried me through decades of modest living and careful saving. Kendra stood in the front row, smiling with tears in her eyes. She'd helped me plan every detail, from the nameplates to the refreshments. Watching her beam with pride made every sleepless night worth it. After the ceremony, a reporter from the local paper approached me for an interview. "Mrs. Carver?" she asked. "Why start this now?" I looked past her toward the students laughing in the corner. "Because it's never too late to turn what you've endured into something that helps someone else," I said. The article that followed ran under the headline, "Retired Teacher Turns Savings into Opportunity for Future Generations." It made me smile and, more importantly, it made Kendra proud. But even as life settled into this new rhythm, I couldn't help but think of Elliot. Not out of anger anymore, but out of curiosity. Where was he? What was he doing now that his empire of self-importance had crumbled? Kendra rarely mentioned him, and I didn't ask. She'd filed for separation quietly, with the quiet determination of someone reclaiming her peace. He'd tried calling her a few times at first, leaving messages about second chances and starting over. But she didn't respond. Eventually, the calls stopped. I thought that would be the end of it. Until one afternoon, about 6 months later, I saw him again by complete accident. I was at the grocery store, browsing the produce aisle, when I heard a familiar voice a few feet away. It was quieter, rougher than I remembered, but still recognizable. I turned my head and there he was, wearing a faded polo shirt and stacking shelves. He didn't notice me at first. His hair was longer, and there were dark circles under his eyes. The man who once bragged about 5-figure clients was now working part-time at a local market. I stood there for a moment, torn between sympathy and disbelief. When he finally looked up and saw me, he froze. His face went pale, then flushed deep red. "Loretta?" he said softly. "Hello, Elliot." He swallowed. "Didn't expect to see you here." I could say the same. For a moment, we just stood there, the hum of the refrigerators filling the space between us. Then I said, "I hope you're doing all right." He nodded awkwardly. "Yeah, just taking things one day at a time." I gave a small smile. "That's a good place to start." He looked down, then back at me. "I heard about the scholarship," he said quietly. "It's a good thing you're doing." "Thank you," I said. It's keeping me busy. He nodded again, his voice barely a whisper. You were right about me. About everything. I wanted to say something comforting, but there wasn't much to say. Some lessons only life can teach. So instead, I reached into my purse, pulled out a card with the scholarship's name and website printed on it, and handed it to him. If you ever meet a student who needs help, I said, send them my way. He took the card carefully, his hands shaking just a little. I will. We parted ways after that, and I didn't see him again for a long time. As I drove home, the encounter lingered in my mind. There was no anger left. No need for vengeance. Just a quiet understanding that sometimes life does the teaching for you. I had no interest in punishing him. The world had already done that in ways I never could. When I got home, Kendra was sitting on the porch with a folder in her lap. She'd been working on something new, a community financial literacy workshop for women. Look at you, I said, smiling. You're starting something of your own. She grinned. Inspired by you, Mom. I want to help women learn what you taught me, that quiet strength is power. Pride swelled in my chest. For all the hurt we'd been through, we had come out the other side stronger, not bitter. Later that evening, as I sat in my garden, I thought of Richard again. I imagined him smiling, that gentle smile of his, proud of how far we'd come. The roses were blooming beautifully that year, their petals open and bright under the setting sunday. Sometimes I realized, revenge isn't about destroying someone else's life. It's about rebuilding your own so beautifully that their opinion no longer matters. Elliot had lost everything he valued. I had gained everything I needed: peace, purpose, and the knowledge that patience had built something far greater than pride ever could. I never wanted revenge to destroy, only to reveal the truth. 3 years later, the knock on my door brought back a ghost I thought I'd never see again. It was a quiet Sunday morning, one of those calm spring days where the world feels freshly washed. The scent of lilacs drifted through the open kitchen window, and a soft breeze stirred the curtains. I'd just finished my tea when I heard 3 gentle taps on the front door. Not the confident knock of a delivery man or the hurried rhythm of a neighbor. This one was hesitant, almost uncertain. When I opened the door, I froze. There he was, Elliot. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. He looked older, thinner, and far removed from the polished man I once knew. His expensive suits were gone, replaced by worn jeans and a simple collared shirt. His hair, once meticulously styled, was streaked with gray, and faint lines creased the corners of his eyes. But what struck me most wasn't how he looked, it was how he stood. Shoulders slightly slumped, hands clasped in front of him, like a man carrying the invisible weight of regret. "Hello, Loretta," he said softly. His voice was quiet, unsteady. "Elliot?" I replied, my tone neutral. "It's been a while." He nodded. "It has. May I come in?" For a second, I hesitated. I wasn't afraid, just cautious. There was a time when I'd have slammed the door on him, but now, that old anger had long since cooled, so I stepped aside. "Of course," I said. "Come in." He entered slowly, looking around as though the house might have changed since he last saw it. But it hadn't, not much anyway. The same floral curtains, the same oak dining table, the same framed photo of Kendra and me on the mantel. He smiled faintly when he saw it. "She looks happy," he said. "She is," I replied. "She's running that financial literacy program she started. It's grown a lot. They just got a community grant." "That's amazing," he said sincerely. "You must be proud." "I am." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Finally, I gestured toward the kitchen. "Tea?" He smiled weakly. "Sure." As I filled the kettle, he sat at the table, his posture humble and still. The man who once dominated every conversation now waited quietly, hands folded. I could feel the awkwardness hanging between us, but there was no malice in it, just the discomfort of 2 people with too much history and not enough words. When I set his cup in front of him, he murmured, "Thank you." We sipped in silence for a few moments before he spoke again. "I wanted to see you," he said carefully. "To say something I should have said a long time ago." I raised an eyebrow but didn't interrupt. I was wrong, he continued. About everything. About you, about money, about what matters. He let out a soft, bitter laugh. You were right from the start. All my life, I chased numbers. I thought they made me powerful. But they made me hollow. His voice cracked slightly at that last word. I said nothing, letting him speak. After Kendra left, everything fell apart. The firm let me go. I burned through what little I had left trying to fix things that couldn't be fixed. Eventually, I had to start over. I've been working at a youth center downtown, helping kids who grew up like I did, angry, impatient, always trying to prove themselves. That surprised me. A youth center? He nodded. Yeah, it's not much, but it's honest. And it's helped me stay sober. I blinked. Sober? He smiled sadly. Yeah. I was drinking more than I admitted back then. Every time I failed, I poured another glass. I thought it made the noise stop. It didn't. I felt something shift in me, then a strange, quiet empathy. For all the ways Elliot had wronged us, he was still human, still capable of falling and learning. And maybe, finally, he'd done both. I didn't come here to ask for anything, he said after a moment. I came to thank you. Thank me? He nodded. That day at the bank, the way you handled it broke me in a way I needed to break. You showed me who I really was, and it's taken me years to face that, but I needed it. His words caught me off guard. For years, I'd imagined him angry, resentful, still clinging to pride. But this wasn't that man. This was someone humbled by life, by consequence, by time. I took a slow sip of tea, letting his confessions sink in. I didn't want to destroy you, Elliot, I said softly. I just wanted you to see what arrogance blinds people to. Respect, humility, patience. Those things matter more than money ever will. He nodded. I know that now. Silence fell again. But it wasn't uncomfortable this time. It was reflective. Peaceful, almost. After a moment, I asked, have you spoken to Kendra? He shook his head. No. I don't expect her to forgive me. She deserves better than what I gave her. She does, I agreed gently. But people can change, and forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. Sometimes it just means understanding. He looked at me then, his eyes glossy with emotion. Do you forgive me? I paused, really thinking about it. I already have, I said. Not because you earned it, but because holding on to anger only poisons the one carrying it. I chose peace a long time ago. He exhaled, a sound that was half sob, half laugh. You're a better person than I ever was, I smiled softly. Not better, just older. I've had more time to learn what matters. He smiled too, and for the first time in years, it looked real, not forced, not prideful, just human. We talked for another hour, about life, about the past, even about the kids at his youth center. He told me about a boy named Tyler who reminded him of himself at 15, brilliant but angry, convinced the world was out to get him. I see a lot of myself in him, Elliot said. But I'm trying to help him before he makes the same mistakes I did. When he finally stood to leave, I walked him to the door. He hesitated for a moment, looking down at his hands. Then he said, You taught me more than any banker, any boss, or any lecture ever could. I smiled. Good. Then maybe all of this wasn't wasted. He nodded, eyes glistening. It wasn't. As he stepped outside, the sunlight fell across his face, and for the first time, I saw not the man who had mocked me years ago, but the man he could have been all along, humbled, wiser, at peace. Take care of yourself, Elliot, I said. You too, Loretta. He turned and walked down the path, and as he disappeared around the corner, I felt no anger, no sadness, only closure. Forgiveness doesn't erase revenge, it completes it. People think wealth is about numbers. It's not, it's about values. I learned that lesson the hard way. Over a lifetime of being underestimated, dismissed, and for a while, quietly mocked. But now, as I sit here in the soft glow of another sunrise, I know that everything I went through, every slight, every smirk, every cruel laugh led me exactly where I needed to be. It's been almost 4 years since Elliot knocked on my door that morning. I still remember the look in his eyes, the mixture of shame, peace, and gratitude. It stayed with me longer than I expected. Since then, we haven't spoken often, but every Christmas, he sends a small handwritten card. No gifts, no long letters. Just a simple note. Still learning. Thank you. I never throw them away. They remind me that even the most stubborn hearts can change if life humbles them enough. As for Kendra, she's thriving. The community financial literacy program she started, the Bloom Project, has grown far beyond what either of us imagined. It began as a small support group for women looking to learn about budgeting and saving, but now it's expanded into workshops, mentorships, and even a small microloan initiative. She's helping dozens of women build the confidence to take control of their finances. She once told me, "Mom, I used to think power came from being fearless, but now I know it comes from being prepared." I couldn't have been prouder. I've stepped back a little from the day-to-day operations of the Carver Future Scholars Fund, but I still attend every award ceremony. Watching those students walk across the stage, shaking hands and holding their certificates, fills me with a joy I can't quite describe. Each year, when I read their essays, their dreams, their determination, I see parts of myself in their words. One of them, a young woman named Ariana, wrote, "My mother always said that being quiet doesn't mean you don't have power, it just means your power doesn't need to shout." When I read that, tears filled my eyes. It was as if she had read my heart. Sometimes, during quiet evenings, I walk through my garden and think about everything that's happened. The roses still bloom faithfully, just like they always have. I've added new flowers too, white lilies, sunflowers, and small sprigs of lavender. Each one reminds me of something different: strength, renewal, peace. It's strange how time softens even the harshest memories. I don't think about Elliot with anger anymore. When I picture him, I see the man who finally learned humility, not the one who mocked me or gambled away his security. In a way, his downfall was my own redemption. It reminded me that kindness and boundaries can coexist, that you can forgive someone without letting them hurt you again. I don't believe in revenge anymore, not in the way most people think of it. True revenge isn't about making someone suffer, it's about thriving in spite of them. It's living a life so full and peaceful that their words no longer have any weight. Richard used to tell me, "Loretta, you can't change people's hearts, but you can show them yours." I didn't understand it then, I do now. If I've learned anything, it's that the quiet ones, the patient ones, the ones who save when no one's watching, who speak softly but act with purpose, those are the people who build things that last. Arrogance burns bright but burns out fast. Patience, though it grows roots so deep that no storm can tear it out. Every now and then, I visit the bank where all this began. The tellers still greet me with warm smiles, though most of them are new faces now. Mr. Hillman retired last year. At his farewell gathering, he pulled me aside and handed me a small card. On it, in neat handwriting, were 5 simple words. "Quiet strength always wins, Loretta." He was right. There's something incredibly freeing about knowing your worth and not needing anyone to validate it. That's the real wealth I've built, not the money in my accounts but the peace in my heart. Last month, Kendra invited me to speak at one of her Bloom Project sessions. The topic was, "What Money Can't Teach You." I was hesitant at first, I've never been one for speeches, but she insisted. When I stood in front of that room filled with women of all ages, I realized that my story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to every woman who had ever been told she wasn't enough. I told them, "You don't need to be loud to be powerful. You don't need to be perfect to be wise. Every dollar you save, every boundary you set, every lesson you learn in silence, that's strength. And one day, the world will see it." When I finished, the room was quiet for a long moment before the applause began. A few women cried. And in that moment, I knew my journey had come full circle. Later that night, as Kendra and I sat on the porch, she leaned her head on my shoulder and said, "You know, Mom, I used to think Elliot ruined everything. But maybe he was just the reason we had to build something better." I smiled. Sometimes that's how life works. The cracks let the light in. She laughed softly. "You always say that. Because it's true." The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, and the sound of cicadas hummed in the background. For a moment, everything was still, no tension, no regret, just peace. I looked at my daughter, at the woman she'd become, and I realized that every choice, every moment of restraint, every ounce of patience had led us here to a life that didn't need approval or validation. I thought about Elliot one last time. Maybe he was out there somewhere, helping another lost kid find their way. Or maybe he was just quietly living, finally understanding what it meant to have enough. Either way, I hoped he'd found his own kind of peace. As for me, I've stopped keeping score. Life's lessons aren't measured in victories or defeats, they're measured in growth. And I've grown in ways money could never quantify. I still check my accounts occasionally, not because I'm obsessed, but because it reminds me of the long road I walked to get here. And each time I close my checkbook, I whisper to myself the same words I've lived by for years. Never underestimate a woman who knows the value of her own patience. Because patience built my peace. Patience built my future. And patience, more than anything else, gave me the life I deserved.